Well, welcome to this impromptu conversation. I'm John Ward, and I have Jackson Pemberton with me, and we just want to have a conversation and put it out there and let people, do what they may with it. Um, you know, Jackson and I have become friends over the last year or so, probably closer to a year, getting close to a year and a half. Sounds better, right? The longer, we've known, but it's been a real blessing in my life uh, to learn about what Jackson's life has been like, what he's doing now, and did have an opportunity to come and stay with him in his home in Utah uh, about a month ago, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was to spend time with him and his wife, and it was just great. And of course, there's nothing like being in person. I mean, this is the closest you can get to that. Uh, and but being together and looking at each other and sharing things that, um, just have occurred in our lives and feel honored to call you a friend and have you as a friend and to have you share with me uh what's
Well,
inside.
it's certainly been good to make your acquaintance and to find that you are a real brother in the sense of common values and common concerns, uh, common viewpoints. So we form a neat little pocket that, so we can have a good echo chamber right here. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, it can get
But
it can sometimes it gets lonely if you don't have comrades in arms, in a sense, right? That we don't have to agree on everything, and of course it's rare that that's ever going to happen between two people. um but yeah, having a foundation of uh the rights that the creator gave us, that we were meant to be free. He gave us, as we've talked about, he gave us free will, right? And
right.
that's the ultimate freedom, right?
Yeah.
We're lucky organisms to have that opportunity, right? To choose, and maybe other organisms are able to choose. uh, but yeah, that's our right to be able to decide and not have other man try to control us, um, for whatever reasons they want to do that. So,
Sorry, here
um,
my inverter's turned on. Is that noise
no,
intrusive?
no,
Okay.
I don't even hear it. Yeah. Is it sunny
Okay,
today?
good.
Is it sunny?
Yes, it's very sunny,
Oh,
and
nice.
I live off grid, so we got an inverter and a battery charger running, and they're making a little noise in the background here.
Yeah. Might disturb you, but it's not disturbing. I
Okay,
can't hear it. Maybe it's
okay.
because my hearing's going, maybe that's why. Uh, so when I had reached out to you a couple of days ago, well, even yesterday, you said, what are you thinking you want to talk about? So I did kind of throw out some things. And when I first reached out to you, I think it was Memorial Day, because I was like, geez, we've been talking about getting on a
Right.
Zoom and recording. And I said, geez, I had just heard from somebody who sent me the message, Happy Memorial Day.
Yeah.
And, you know, I I'm no expert on 20th century history of all our wars, but I've never been a big fan of like war movies. Um, just what all the shooting, and there's a story to be told, right? A lot of times
Yeah.
it's probably been propaganda in a lot of ways to get us to think a particular way. But it made me think about, well, I certainly understand if somebody said Merry Christmas to somebody, like it's a merry day. That was the
Yeah,
day Jesus Christ was born, so you'd say, yeah, that's a happy day. But
yeah,
if you're talking about memorial, uh, it just seems wrong to be calling it happy. Like
yeah,
I understand that for one thing, it's a day off for a lot of people, so that's pretty fun
yeah,
for for those that need a break uh
and
and time with family and friends. But you had some thoughts on that, so I'm interested in hearing what you think about
yeah.
Memorial
Well,
Day. Yeah.
that's that's a very that's a very interesting topic that you raised there because there's so many ways to look at that whole situation. There are truly um, things to celebrate and be grateful and joyful about. At the same time, there is horrific things to be sad about, all mixed up together
Mm,
uh, in
yeah.
one single event, namely a war. Um, Wars have a way of breaking all the rules in many
Mm,
ways,
mm,
in- including these kind of cultural things.
yeah.
But if you focus on the soldier and his willingness to put his life on the line for freedom, that's an incredibly beautiful thing. At the same time, the fact that he has to do that is a horrific thing.
Mm,
And it's kind of mind-boggling that both of those go down the same path.
mm, yeah.
That's yeah,
I did
uh,
think when you commented in your text to me that there was sort of a sad slash happy part of
yeah,
it that
yeah.
I
I
did
think that
think, yeah, go ahead.
I think that's what I'm trying to say is there's aspects that are wonderful and aspects that are horrible
Yeah,
altogether. And
yeah,
it's kind of an unusual, thank heavens, thank God it's unusual. Um, we're not in war all the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, we're not at the extremes of that, right? Which is
right.
somebody and many obviously
Yeah,
uh, believe that potentially dying for
yeah,
their fellow man
yeah.
is more important than their own life. Like it's that important. So that's real love, right? I mean, it's love. I mean, you're loving
Yes,
on the people that you're trying to protect.
right.
If that's your uh, intent for going and trying to defend uh, what you believe is the best way of life for you're thinking obviously probably your immediate family, uh,
Yeah.
your maybe your wife, maybe your new wife. Like you get
Yeah,
married and six days later you're in another country,
yeah,
and you don't know if you're ever coming back.
right.
And and
Yeah,
then yeah, and
and
then somebody's told you that uh, this is necessary for to continue our way of life, to have freedom, and to know that may well it's you and I talked about it. There's stories written that it wasn't always for just our safety. It was part of what you brought up about um, President and General Eisenhower and the military industrial complex that he warned us about,
uh,
and that's a money machine,
yes,
and that war has been almost just as much about money, if not more, than really our safety. Um, though there are bad actors in the
Yeah,
world, that you can't just let run amok.
right.
Um, but sometimes those things are like planted, like they plant that uh
Yeah,
situation in play, and then now we got to go and defend it, so it's a setup, like
right,
that certainly they've gotten almost more creative as time goes on. That's what I've seen in the
right.
last, let's just say, looking back on some of the last 100 years, they seem to have gotten
Yeah.
pretty pretty
I think,
pretty complex about it.
and if there are people who have that mindset, and I'm quite sure there are, they're uh, they're just like a drug dealer who says to himself, "Well, if I don't sell them the drug, somebody else will." And that's a cop out, and
Yeah,
yeah. Some of these people have a lot of blood on their hands, no doubt
yeah,
about it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
To deliberately put us in a war just to make money, that's gotta be horrific.
yeah.
Yeah. At the
I
same
won't.
time,
Yeah, go
at
ahead.
the same time, this nation has been singularly blessed, and we've never had a war within our boundaries.
Yeah,
Well, we had a war when we fought among
sure.
ourselves, had a
Yeah,
horrible war. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But we've
of
never been
course.
attacked except the Twin Towers,
Yep,
and we should see that as a warning, recognize how that happened, and that it can happen again if we're not on our toes.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. I mean, of course, people that may listen to this, there's going to be some that have the different thoughts about what happened on 9/11 and how that came to fruition. And we're not going to try to cover that today. It's not that.
no, yeah, that's a topic for another day.
Yeah, and people you know, should question things,
Yeah,
right? They
that's right.
should
Yes,
look into things. Don't just take it for face value,
that's right.
because we know that people have agendas, you
Yes,
know,
yeah, yeah,
and
they do.
yeah, and I guess we all do in some way.
Yeah,
Um, and so, and I'm not going to hop on this because I brought it up with you earlier, and I'm really saying it so those that do listen to this conversation may look this gentleman up like I did. A guy named Smedley Butler, who wrote a book. It
yeah.
was first published in 1935, 36, and it was called War is a Racket. And at the time, he was the most celebrated soldier of all time. He had the most amount of medals, all kinds of uh, wars and coups d'etats, and uh,
Hmm.
yeah, like he was definitely somebody that you would think, wow, he's all about, being a military man and
Right.
fighting and wars, and he wouldn't have anything negative to say about, because it's basically, trouncing on himself, you know.
Yeah, then he
But yeah,
comes out with his title, "War is a Racket."
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, like, we've heard these terms, racketeer, or the term racketeering, which to me
hmm.
always sounds like, of course, if the mafia is involved, there's always racketeering.
Right,
That's always one of the common charges, right?
right, right.
Uh, and he made a comment in his book, and I'm not going to get it exact, but let's get close. Is he says I could teach Al Capone, a few things. Like he could only manage like three districts within Chicago, and I
Okay,
I managed like 21, uh, you know, operations in like
okay.
21 different countries. And So
right.
I could teach him a few things. Uh,
Uh,
he was a
yeah,
small player compared to what I'm talking about, this
yeah,
big machine of war. And the real reason I'm even bringing it up is because that's a lot of the media headlines, or it's just, to me, it's all over the place, but it could be just because I'm stuck in my own algorithm, and that's what I'm seeing. Um, but it's just headlines like,
yeah,
Trump's given Putin his final warning.
right.
Like, you're gonna give like the final warning, like an ultimatum to Russia, right?
Yeah,
Like, what are you doing? If that's real, and it doesn't even have to be real, it's the rallying cry that you get people fired up.
yeah.
Back to
Well,
your point about
30,
9/11.
yeah,
9/11, yeah, let me just say that about 9/11 is
yeah,
because it was the first time we'd ever been attacked on our own land. And then they told us they want to, these people that did this, they want to get rid of all of us. They want to get
yeah,
rid of every last American. They
yeah,
won't stop until they get rid of all of us. So they got us all fired up. And that's what I don't like is
yeah,
uh they use the psychological
yeah,
warfare on us.
yeah,
And then because part of that is fear that if we don't act,
right.
yeah, then it's going to be worse for us than if we do act, which, if you read this book War is a Racket, and the little you and I have talked about it,
Yeah,
the devastation just goes through your lineage for, if you
yeah,
somebody was lost in the war, somebody came back, was
yeah,
broken mentally, broken physically.
yeah.
uh that doesn't just like silo itself. It rips through time.
The whole society and particularly the families involved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And those families are what we're made of. That's
right. Yeah, that's the real us.
yeah, that's the real us.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
somebody else. They're amongst us if it's not us directly,
yeah.
right?
Well,
So
these people who do this are they're really traitors, and it's treasonous to use the freedom that we have against us. You know,
mhm.
they use the freedom to foment war and freedom of speech to foment war. Um, so they use freedom against us ourselves, and it's kind of crazy. It's like political suicide.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
you get yourself aligned against yourself. You have this beautiful freedom, and then
Mhm.
you foment actions that threaten it. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
But selfishness, people get caught up in selfishness and schemes and plans and treacherous agreements.
yeah.
40 years ago, they called this thing. What was the name? Shoot, I've lost it now. There was a good label used years ago about. It'll come back to me, maybe.
Mm, yeah. It was,
People.
do you know generally what it was about? What the label?
Oh, well, yeah, it's about acting against ourselves.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
treacherous,
Yeah.
tyranny. Yeah,
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up is uh it's how you and I met, because you're quoted in the book Becoming Your Own Banker, some writings that you did back in 75, that you basically were channeling some of the founding fathers. in some articles that you wrote for the Freeman, uh,
yeah,
which was published by the Foundation for Economic Education. Sorry.
right.
Um, and it's that part where you're talking about the seeds, right? Can of liberty, right? Can cut both ways, basically, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It can
Liberty
be your
has,
freedom, and then it
yeah,
could be your demise
right.
if you don't
Liberty
tend the
has this,
garden,
yeah.
right? If you don't tend it. So they
And that,
know, they know when we've got freedom on one side that we can flip what that really means. You know, it's supposed to mean all goodness. Sounds like
yeah,
it's all goodness. But then we can use it against you. Like, so we always have the polar opposite.
right,
And so they know even with uh, something that people are going to pay attention to, they're going to pay attention to
right,
freedom and how we can literally turn it uh, against ourselves or
right,
against the people, really.
yeah. Yeah,
You,
well, we're seeing a lot of that. We have so much freedom that China can come in and buy land around our military bases. Um, you know, so we have this constant war among ourselves, in a sense. We have this freedom that gets abused, and that that's the beginning of the end of freedom. So it's political suicide eventually if it runs full course.
hmm,
Yeah.
yeah,
So as citizens, we've got to be on the ball. We've got to understand what's going on and act against it. Make sure it doesn't overtake us. But the bottom line of all that, of course, is integrity.
yeah,
Uh, I'm not sure freedom can survive widespread dishonesty.
yeah.
And,
That makes
if,
sense.
if the citizens aren't self-disciplined, they're going to be disciplined by somebody else. And that's the end of freedom. It's pretty simple. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's really what the country was founded on
yeah,
was
yes,
self-governance
right.
right down to the individual,
Yeah,
um, and to continually look for somebody else to do it, right? Like
yeah,
I saw a video this morning and it was this guy was holding up um a picture. He says it's a meme, which I don't get into all this stuff, but I guess I see them from here and there on the
yeah,
internet. And it was two guys sitting on a pile of sand, basically on each was on an island, and
yeah,
one was just laying back on the island, and he's found a way to spell out the word help in large letters, and the other guy somehow had I don't know if he made it or whatever he did. He had a ladder and he was putting it up against this palm tree and trying to go up and get, maybe a coconut tree or whatever. But he was,
right.
you could see it up there, and he was taking charge, right? He was taking
Yeah,
action
yeah,
as opposed to I'm looking for somebody else to take the action because I'm too
right.
busy. I'm too busy working, stressed out, raising a family, getting food on the table, running them to events. I'm fried, and that's the ultimate lack of freedom in my mind.
Yeah,
But if we don't rethink, the way our society runs, and that it's all sort of economics driven, right? It's economics driven all the way up to, maybe these bad actors,
yeah,
the
yeah,
treasonous uh, acts that occur, and we're not really different.
Yeah,
Like in that way that we're all chasing the money. We're all chasing
yeah,
this thing that seems to keep slipping and slipping and slipping away from us.
yeah, yeah. We're all economic critters, that's for sure. You know,
Yeah.
the country was founded, well, people came here for two main reasons. One of them was they were sick and tired of living where they had no freedom. Their governments were old and filled with bureaucracy. And so they were dealing with the same kind of thing we're dealing with. Old governments, old, deeply entrenched agents who abused their power and oppressed the people. They wanted out of that, and they could see a chance to come to America and get away from that. Of course, the other thing was free land, and that was a huge draw. But they came here for freedom, yeah, and they found it. And if we're not careful, we're going to run the same course those countries ran, where eventually you got these agents that abuse their power, and we're back to slavery, some degree of it. It's like the people who rule make sure we're slaves right up to the point where we don't rebel.
Yeah, sorry to laugh, but that's what my mind was thinking as you were
Yeah,
going. You said it well. Yeah, that's exactly right.
yeah, push us right to the limit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So like you said, so we don't really recognize it like the frog that goes into lukewarm water and they turn up the
yeah,
heat, right? Like you don't really, something's not right.
yeah,
This doesn't feel right. I can't seem to get ahead, all that kind of stuff.
right.
But why is it? I just can't really get my finger on it. And in fact, I don't even know if I can put my mind on it because it seems like a mountain that I just can't climb over. I just can't get to the other side. So I just keep playing this game that they've got me playing, and hopefully I'll get mine, right? That's what
Yeah,
then we're really just competing and not
yeah,
loving and
yeah.
collaborating and yeah,
And
I
and maybe there's well, maybe it's not a parallel. Maybe it's actually one of the outcomes of that political situation is the financial side of it, where in this case, Alexander Hamilton wanted to start a central bank, and there were people around him who understood what that meant. And eventually we have this banking system, which we grow up in it. We think that's the way you do it. When you want a car, you go to the bank. And that whole paradigm is well established. It's a habit, it's a tradition, it's all that,
yeah,
but it's not the ideal situation. It's not freedom, it's oppression. And it's institutionalized
mm,
because of that, and then because of the history of it, and we grow up with it. We think, well, that's just the way it is. Uh,
so true.
One of the things I learned in England, I spent a couple of years there, and one of my jobs was to I'm going to say interview, but examine. We had about 50 houses we were in charge of looking after. And it was really revealing to meet the people who lived in those houses. Some of them lived in the same house their entire life, and the house belonged to somebody else. And
Mm,
I remember one place there was a large hole in the ceiling where the plaster had fallen down, and the lath was exposed. The west wall was supposed to be a weeping wall. Anytime it rained hard, the water would come through the bricks and run down the inside of that wall, which is conditions that we would not tolerate.
Mhm.
And it was, even the poor people in the United States would complain about that. But these good people, they had this fatalistic attitude that that's just the way it is, and they just live with it. I think I asked the lady, "Did you contact the well, this was church-owned property?" I said, "Did you contact the church and tell them what's happening here?" And I don't remember her answer, but it was again, it was kind of a if she did, it was hopeless. She
Mhm.
didn't think anything was going to happen, and it obviously didn't. I don't know why. I don't know the details of that, but we made sure it got fixed right away. But the point I'm trying to make is people grew up in this, they just think that's the way it is, and so they live with it. And that's true of the banking system. It's not the best system. The best one is what we call infinite banking, no question about it. I wish I'd learned about it before I was 84 years old. I might
Yeah.
have done something about it, but I'm still paying interest.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
uh, I guess I'm in a position of having to say, well, that's the way it is.
Well, yeah, it certainly
Yeah,
has been the way it's been your adult life, right? Anytime
yeah,
you needed
yeah,
financing, it
yeah.
wasn't it wasn't done through the infinite banking concept. In fact,
No,
that term hadn't even come about yet.
right,
But back to what you're saying, uh, I just recycle some of Nelson Nash's, the developer sort of pioneer of the infinite banking concept in all the things he says. But one of the things he talks about is controlling the banking function in your life. Like
right,
he's not denying that this is part of life. Now, could we have a different system? Sure. But the system we have, the way the world is set up for the most part, but certainly let's just talk about the US, the United States, is um, there is gonna there is gonna be banking that goes on because you can either have your money sitting somewhere growing for you, and if you take that off the table, you take those chips, you take that cash, and you pay for it. Well, that money's never going to be sitting there making money again, right? So that's his thing about your very first principle is we finance everything that we buy, even if we pay cash, because we gave up the interest that that cash could have
right,
continued to earn.
right,
But back to the word like control, I've heard it all the years I've been working with IBC, Infinite Banking. Um, but I don't think until, a couple of days ago, I really got this idea that having control over whether I have access to cash. And I often talk about the late 80s, early 90s, because I think that was one of the toughest economic times ever in my lifetime. Now, right, you could talk about others maybe, but for me, everybody talks about, well, the dot-com bubble burst, in early
right,
2000s.
yeah,
Then you have the great financial crisis of 2008. And then of course we had the COVID thing happen in 2020, and then that was less severe, obviously,
yeah,
because well, at least well, on the surface it was. Let's just leave it at that. But I do talk about those late 80s and how when corporations start to shut down, people get laid off, people no longer have equity in their homes because the real estate market crashes too. So we had a stock market crash. We had, what was that? Black. I always forget which days, like I think Black Tuesday was the 1929. I think
Yeah.
Black Monday was 1987,
Hmm.
but it doesn't really matter. People can correct me if they want, but it was, the biggest drop in a single day in history
Right. Right.
of the stock market. And so, that was the beginning of some trouble in the stock market, but then we had the real estate crash.
Yeah.
Um,
2008.
and and then I owned I cut lawns and I also did some landscape construction work, did some retaining walls and some walkways. So but I wasn't hugely successful. I just, I was figuring it out. And, I hadn't even worked in that field, not that it's,
Right.
cutting lawns is difficult, but I hadn't been learning how to trim bushes and lay down brick and all that. But I just learned as I went. And anyways, I would end
Wait.
up sometimes having people owe me hundreds of dollars, but
Yeah.
they were general contractors. Everybody was a general contractor sometime in the mid 80s, right? Because there's a housing boom.
Yeah.
There's a market, there's renovations, there's buying and selling houses, just
Yeah.
like we've got now, or have had. So I literally would have to, when things got really bad in the late 80s, early 90s, I'd have to stop by these general contractors' office. And they were in the office. They weren't out in the field. There was no work to be done. There was
Yeah.
no houses being built. There was no renovations really happening.
Yeah.
Or, there was more people in the business than there was work, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I would literally go in, the guy would owe me like $400 to have done his cleanup in his yard, right? And he'd say, "Can I give you 75 bucks this week?" And if I didn't stop by, I'd have to stop by the diner and talk to
Yeah.
the owner and go out back and he's counting all his money and he's like, I can give you a little here, right? They
Yeah.
they they were pinching pennies.
Yeah.
And even if there's an opportunity, which there always is opportunities, even in bad times, right? What
Yeah.
looks like bad for everybody is not bad for everybody. It's
Yeah.
bad for those who can see it and they can't take advantage of it
Right.
because the banks, they decide. They decide who gets money and who doesn't.
Right.
So I'll backtrack a little bit on this story because it just made me think of it. When I first got into the landscape business, I wanted a dump truck. And when I was growing up, my barber lived across the street. Sal, Sal's gone, but Sal D'Amato. Sal had two boys. Both of them became bankers. One was the president of a bank in my hometown, and another was in the town I went to high school in. And I went
Okay.
with my dad to see the one in my high school town. And I had the application, and he sits across from us, nice enough guy, but he says, "We really don't want this business. We don't want this loan for this dump truck." And
Hmm.
I was dumbfounded. I was like, "What do you mean? Is that what you guys do? You just lend money and you take collateral, as your security?" And you know, I I learned as time went on that they can choose, and rightfully so. If they have the money, they get to
Yeah.
choose what they invest in.
Right.
And if you don't have any money, it doesn't matter how many great opportunities you see. If you don't have control of the banking function in your life, then there's going to come a time when you are
Yeah,
that oppressed person. You are
yeah,
that slave in
yeah,
a sense, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so I
yeah.
thanks for letting me ramble on about that. But
Well, yeah, I've learned that the hard way. Back when I was a young man, you could go to a small bank and your credit would be evaluated by the loan officer. He didn't appeal to your credit rating, although he would check it probably, but he would know you as a friend, as a neighbor, and you could get credit when you needed it. Nowadays, it's the opposite. We have all this standardization of evaluation of credit risk. I mean, it's one of those things where the goal has defeated itself. In the interest of making every application treated equally, we have mechanized loan applications
mhm,
to the point that there is no reference to the integrity or the character of the would-be borrower.
mhm.
So when I'm desperate for money, I can't get it, even though I'm a good risk. I've
Yep.
never defaulted on anything,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
I won't, and I won't. But
Mhm.
anyway,
Well,
so many things have just gone backward on us because of mechanization, and for the sake of equality, we have gross inequality.
yeah. Yeah, they've tried to, as you say, mechanize it. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
I I feel like back to why do you want control of the banking function in your life?
well,
And
I
that
can
is
tell.
because you get to decide not to take advantage of everything that comes your way,
Right,
every opportunity to help somebody. If it doesn't, sadly, I'm either going to gift this money to this person because I'm trying to help them and I don't expect to ever get a dime back,
yeah,
or I don't lend to them at all because I don't give them any money because they're never going to get it back. And
right,
maybe I've tried that before, but back to uh, when I'm talking to prospects in particular, right? I do try to remind clients too, but you you are not you're not desperate to get a rate of return on your money when you have easy access to your liquid cash,
right,
because you're not going to say I'm going to chase this newfangled cryptocurrency token because I think it might go up and I'll make whatever percent, right? Or
mm,
hey,
yeah,
I'm gonna, put it into this thing and I think I'll get 8%. Like when you really know there's an opportunity maybe to turn a buck with the money that you have access to, that you've saved, then you can be picky, just like that banker was with me,
yeah,
right?
right,
The reason he wasn't interested in my business was probably because he was interested in other business.
yeah,
He knew what business he was in, which was making money from other people's money, but he also knew that, well, yeah, if I give this kid 20,000, that's 20,000 that doesn't go into this pool that buys me that office building that's, appraised for 1 million, but I can pick it up for 400,000 right now. So I'm going to put the
right,
20 into that. I'm not giving it to some kid who's just trying to get started in his landscape business, even if I know him. And that's
right,
I mean, we've given them that right by giving our deposits, putting all our money there first
yeah,
and
yeah,
storing it there. So they have jurisdiction over our money.
right.
Controlling the banking function is you having jurisdiction over your own money.
What a welcome idea. What a crazy idea.
Yeah, what a crazy idea.
Yeah,
I mean, back back full circle on that idea that yeah, that's
yeah,
just the way it is. Well, why isn't everybody doing this? Well, first of all, not everybody knows about it.
yeah,
And those that do it, well, they learn about it, they do it. But then there's
yeah,
many that have learned about it through me and many others,
yeah,
and they just get stuck because they're just saying, ugh,
yeah,
just I just can't get my mind around it yet.
yeah. It's a pretty violent paradigm shift
Mm,
to think that you can be your own banker. And it's like, what?
yeah.
That's crazy. Against the common understanding, it's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like,
And
what are you
that,
even talking about? Yeah, what are you talking?
yeah, yeah. So that's unfortunate.
It is.
Yeah.
I want to jump a little bit to something you and I talked about before we started recording, which is um, the state representative in Utah um, named Ken
Oh,
Ivory that started his uh, basically an educational. It's like an hour long each module, and there's only I think six of them, and it's basically him teaching the citizens of a state or the country, like just so that they can educate, um, help educate, have a relationship with their legislators within the state. So they're
hmm.
representatives, and he's a
Right,
representative, of course, because we've hired them to do a job, but
right.
many weren't really educated on what all the state's rights are,
Hmm.
where the limitations are on the federal side, so what wasn't given to the federal is 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 a is their jurisdiction by the
Right,
Constitution. Then everything else falls back to the states. And do the
right.
states take that responsibility, or do they abdicate it back to the federal government? And the federal government just is basically, no pun intended, but they're land grabbers. They just keep grabbing
Yeah.
literal and figurative land.
Hmm.
And that's going to be another segue in this me bringing this up. But he was part of a group in Utah that, again, this is Ken Ivory, just like it sounds. If you want to look him up, and igovern.us is the website for this course that you can take to try to help educate your legislators.
What,
But
what was the URL? I govern.
yeah, igovern.us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But Utah has created a repository of some of your reserves within the state.
Hmm.
So your rainy day fund, your emergency money, whatever, right? What's
Right.
not being put into the budget, and that 10% of that reserve pile can be put into precious metals, or can be precious metals like gold and silver.
Okay.
So you guys are actually doing that. And of course, gold and silver have gone up quite a bit, say in the last 5 years, and quite a
Right.
bit even in the last year and a half
Right.
or 15 months. Um, but they were also trying to get it to be legal tender, you know, to
Yes.
be even starting just with the state government and paying suppliers and people that they do business with, and being able to, if they wanted it in gold or silver, you could pay them in gold and silver. But it got passed by both the House and the Senate in Utah.
Right.
But unfortunately, at like the 11th and a half hour, uh,
Yeah.
the governor um, vetoed it. And for whatever reason, even
Governor,
though I think
Governor.
your Senate could have like even overridden the veto, they chose not to
Oh,
because
I hadn't
I'm
heard
thinking
that.
it was the influence of the banking lobbyists.
Uh,
you know, they don't
so,
they don't want this to be, a slippery slope.
so this was recent. Governor Cox vetoed it.
Yep, yep.
Uh,
It's a
I
big
happen
deal.
to, I happen to know Governor Cox personally. He's from
Well,
my hometown, my Utah hometown, Fairview.
yeah.
That's interesting. I should call him up and chew him out.
Well, it'd be interesting to just have a cup of coffee with him and
Yeah.
uh and have him say, "Hey,
Well,
this is
neither
the
one
re
of us
this
drink.
this is what's
Neither one of
that?
us drink coffee. We'd have to have a chocolate together,
Oh yeah,
but
yeah. Let's have chocolate. Yeah, so
yeah,
there you go.
yeah,
Anyways, yeah, it would be interesting, can he even tell you the truth of it all, right? Which is
yeah,
there was obvious to me, there's obvious pressure because I
yeah,
I think, he showed signs he was supportive of it.
yeah,
Uh, and then, of course, it only takes one phone call, one visit at your door, and you might change your ways because,
yeah,
I care about my immediate family. I care about, yeah, whatever they're going to try to do to me, whether it be physical or just try
yeah,
to ruin me in some way, somehow. Um, so you can't do any good if you're out, you're on the outside or you're
right,
dead.
yeah.
Um,
I have no idea why he vetoed that, but my first impression is, uh, at least I hope this is what he was thinking, is how do you implement that? How does the state of Utah pay its contractors in gold? I suspect that every contractor that I know of in Utah who could get gold would get it rather than Federal Reserve notes.
yeah, yeah. Well,
And so I hope it's a practical matter that says, okay, I like
yeah,
the idea, but how in the world do you make this happen? There's kind of you got to jump over a chasm to bring this into fruition, to make it general tender. It can be legal, but it's certainly not general.
yeah.
Uh, I don't know. I'm just guessing out loud.
Well, I'll just guess right back.
Good.
Uh, that I feel um, that if your intentions are good, right, that you believe this would be great, and I don't know how to get it done, how to bring it to fruition, you'd still sign it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
because just like, hey, I'm making an investment in something, and maybe I didn't see everything coming, and it ended up turning out it wasn't
Yeah.
the best use of our time and our money.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's amazing back to the ingenuity of man is put a problem in front of them and they'll work to you know
Yeah. Yeah.
wee
That's
hours of the
true.
morning trying to figure out how to bring it to
Right.
reality
Right.
because but I also can say a little bit of my own research. I think of a company called Kinesis Money, I think is maybe their site. Forget where they're based, is an Irish or Scottish guy or something that runs the company. And they basically everything's digital, right? So you wouldn't be delivering physical gold to anybody. So
Yeah.
these systems are already built. They're kind of like
Right.
blockchain, so you can trust them, or as they call it, trustless, meaning it's inherent that the blockchain
Yeah.
is trustworthy. Um, and so people would take the gold or silver or whatever they choose as payment, but they wouldn't actually be, backing up a flatbed with, a few bricks, to pay people.
Yeah,
Uh, so I think it's the system's already there. So that's the little pushback I might give on maybe that
yeah.
idea that,
Well,
but what do I know?
there is another thing that's happened in Utah. I'm not, I don't remember the name of the group, but they have printed uh, what looks like money. It
Mhm.
has all the earmarks of a Federal Reserve note, except it's not like that, but it looks like money. And this paper has embedded within it enough gold so that it is worth what the face value of the paper is.
Yeah.
Um, I wish I could remember the name of the
Goldbacks.
gold backs. I think you've heard of it then. Okay,
Hmm.
that sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think there's
people
only
are,
three states.
yeah,
If I remember, I think it's Utah, maybe Wyoming, and New Hampshire. So we live
okay.
in two of the
Oh, you
three
live there.
states.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
So yeah.
people are trying to make it happen, and that's good. That's wonderful. Yeah,
Well, yeah, anybody that doesn't really know why we're even saying this, right, is, the importance is that it's a real asset. It's a store of money, gold and silver. It's what our founders intended us to use as
yeah,
currency.
yes, it is.
And uh, they know that, um, that you're basically saying you have to have something backing the money that you're creating,
Right,
so that you put a limit on how much you actually create, right? If when
right.
we came off the so-called gold standard,
Yeah,
uh, in Nixon's administration, well, then that's when America looked like the most prosperous country ever, over the last 50 years,
right.
because we could just do whatever we wanted with the money supply and move it around and up and down, and it caused some trouble, but it also made people feel very prosperous, and we were more prosperous, meaning we had more things and more stuff than
Yeah,
probably most people in the world, right? But back to prior to getting rid of the or closing the gold window, um, yeah, you had limits on the money supply. You couldn't just say, hey, you know,
right.
we're running up all this debt. Why don't we just get more money? Why don't we create more debt?
Yeah, and just print
But
money.
yeah, just print it. And so
Yeah,
I I also want to just, so that don't harp on this whole thing on that end, but also Representative uh, Ivory from Utah. He is on a mission to try to get back uh, land, Utah land that is
yeah,
federally owned right now.
yes. Yeah,
And
the feds own way too much of the West.
it's astronomical when you look
Hmm.
at, I don't remember the percentage of Utah that is owned by the federal government, but it's over 50%.
Yeah, I think it's about 75 or 80.
I thought it was around 75.
Yeah, yeah,
And and of course they make a lot of this land, like national parks. And
yeah,
and that means basically hands off. We'll let you pay to come in and do whatever you do here, buy
yeah,
things and pay taxes, but we're there's a reason they want that land. And
yeah,
he shows a map on one of his modules. He shows a map of basically cutting the country uh, vertically in half.
right. The West
In
is
the
all red.
Yeah,
federally owned. Yeah,
the West is just totally owned by the federal government. I
right,
say totally, but huge percentage.
right.
It looks like 80, 90%. And I think
Yeah,
he even notates it. And then he shows the eastern half,
right,
and it's pretty much like 5% is owned by the
right.
federal government. So
And he does it
I think that's a
explain.
really good. I mean, hey, he's a politician. And I'm not a big fan of politicians because I usually say, well, I've heard politicians say there's really, these guys all have an axe to grind. They've all got they're politicians. They play the
Yeah,
game of politics.
yeah,
So maybe he has some axe to grind, but I have to say, I really, really like him. And it just so happens he's a representative in your state,
yeah,
and he's talking limited government. He's talking about limited federal government. He's talking about sound money,
yeah,
all the things that are total opposite of what has got us into this,
yeah.
stressful, chase the economics lifestyle that most people think is the only
Right.
way it can be done in this country. And he's going back to the way that the country was founded. And
So,
we need people to do the work that he's doing. And I'm shocked, when I see somebody that has that title
right.
that is he's putting a bullseye on himself. I mean, that's what he's doing,
Yeah.
but that's a guy you can get behind.
So does Ken Ivory explain how this happened? That the West is federal and the East is private?
I don't recall at this point, but I bet you know something about it.
Well, I do, and it's another case where public trust was not kept.
Hmm.
Congress was supposed to sell off land when a territory became a state. It was tradition, should have been put into law, but it was tradition that the federal government would sell off that land and it could become private land. And they quit doing that so that the federal government retained all this land in the West. I can't remember what year that was, but it
Yeah.
seems like it was late 1800s. It
Mhm.
would be yeah, about the turn of the century because Utah became a state 1895, I think, and other states were coming aboard about that same time. And all these states in the West, the land was retained by the federal government instead of being sold like it should have been. And I think one of the things that's happening now, and hopefully Trump is trying to sell a bunch of that land
Right.
and pay off the national debt. He could easily do it. Just sell the land and pay off the debt.
Yeah. It's
Why
yeah,
not? Why not? It's a huge asset. The
oh
federal
my
government
gosh.
owns.
Yeah. As long as
Yeah.
it hasn't already been used as collateral.
Yeah. That's
With all these derivatives and all kinds of crazy
yeah.
shenanigans with the financial system. But uh, that's where I am always dumbfounded when I see things, maybe it's by design that, you know, there's been other presidents that I've liked, but of course, knowing, things that I learned later, I go, geez, they also were involved in the drug smuggling, but man,
Yeah.
they did all these other good things, and I look at Trump sometimes and I'm not picking sides of the aisle. I'm just saying, uh,
Yeah.
you know, there's times where I'm like, he's selling us out, he's selling us out. And then other times I'm
It's
saying,
okay.
oh my gosh, he's doing exactly what we'd hope he would do, you know. And
Yeah.
so he's such a oxymoron, like I just
Yeah.
I can't figure out whether he's good for us or not good for us. But probably always going to get a mixed bag no matter who's in. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't
yeah.
know. So, yeah. Well, hey, I'm wondering if you might need to go, uh, or if you want to keep talking.
Oh, whatever. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm free.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, I'm going to kind of wrap it up here, because people don't really want to watch these super long videos, I don't think, unless they got nothing to do. And maybe if they have nothing to do, they're not going to choose this. So we'll try to limit it. But uh, we mentioned igovern.us, Ken Ivory, but you
Right.
had mentioned there's another group. Are you willing to share? There was,
Oh,
um,
yeah, the 10th Amendment Center.
okay.
Uh, it's about 12 years old. Um, they've actually published about 10 of my articles over the years, and but they have come from nobody in the middle of nowhere to uh, an often sought out source of example legislation that a number of states have taken advantage of that resource. And legislators from various states go to the 10th Amendment Center. Of course, the 10th Amendment is the one that says that any power not delegated by the Constitution to the federal government remains with the states and the people. And so the 10th Amendment Center is trying to raise the awareness of that principle
Yeah.
and get power back to the states. And they're having remarkable success in the last few years, especially. The
Wow.
last two or 3 years, they're beginning to really be used as a resource for state legislators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly going to add that to the show notes, find their website. I'm sure they have a website, and
Oh yeah,
put that
yeah,
in the show notes along with igovern.us because they're on similar paths,
yeah,
obviously that's
yeah,
why you brought it up, and thanks for sharing that. It's always amazing, right? You wake up one day and any day and
yeah,
you don't know what you're going to learn that you not that I know I already know I don't know everything. I don't even come close to that. But it is amazing when you kind of circle in this freedom movement, and this thing's been going on for 12 years and I've never heard of it. I'm not,
yeah,
right? You kind of think, if I'm circling in this space, I'm going to know pretty much everything that's going on or close to it. But wow, exciting because
yeah,
that, you know, I think like what really sort of bonded us, at least in my mind, right away, is because of the work you did all those years ago and continue to do. But the I feel in my heart that we did something absolutely amazing when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution in the
yeah,
Bill of Rights. Uh, that it was extremely unique, one of a kind, a
yes,
golden opportunity, and it's been diminished in so many ways, but it's
right,
not gone. It's not gone. It's still here. There's still people like the 10th Amendment Center.
right,
Those people feel the same way that we do, which is we were given a gift and by our creator because they clearly uh,
yes,
they pondered, they meditated on this with the creator, right? They
yes,
tried to be as true and real and thoughtful as any group of guys could actually have ever been. That's kind of the way. I mean, I'm not saying there wasn't others before or after, whatever, right? But nothing more special than what
yeah,
they did. they toiled over
Yeah,
the effort to create this thing for us, and they were paying it forward, as the famous or today's kind of
yeah,
phrase goes, right? They knew they were doing this for future generations, but they also
yeah.
knew that we had to tend to it, and
Right.
we still have that chance to do that. It's not gone yet. It could
That's
it
right.
could be. It could be. And that's what people need to realize is
Yeah,
we have something to stand on.
yeah.
Uh,
We're here just like the people in England whose seating had fallen down on them. They just think, well, that's the way it is.
right.
And we have too much of that in our country. We think, well, this is just the way it is. It's not the way it is unless we let it be that.
Mhm.
We just need to stand up for ourselves and vote for legislators who have honor and integrity instead of political acumen,
Yeah.
whatever that is. Yeah,
Yeah, right, right.
yeah, yeah,
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. Yeah, just it's good to share and
yeah.
hopefully
Well,
it's
I have
helpful.
hope we haven't been too boring.
Well, I haven't been bored.
Well, I haven't either.
you know, right? Like as if that what really matters, but it in the end it is about you and I. We got to at least enjoy the conversation, and hopefully we're doing it with well, we know we're doing it with the intent to help others,
Yes,
think about things and maybe question some things
yeah,
and take back um what is rightfully theirs. Um,
right.
yeah. I got to
Yeah,
figure out how to shut this off and then we can talk, but just trying to
okay.
shut off the video, but probably gonna have to put my glasses on. There we go. Okay.